Hi there, I'm Mike Ernst, and this is the second chapter in the Intermediate Photoshop for Planners course, part of Planners and Courses. And in this video, we're going to talk about working with layers. Now, this is really where working with Photoshop gets exciting, because you can do a lot more things once you start figuring out how to work with layers. But before we get into that, let's start at the beginning. What are layers? Well, let's take this image, that very straightforward image. You got some geometric shapes, some basic colors, and you got a gray background. So let's take this two-dimensional image and pretend that we could view it from the side. It might look something like this. And you can clearly see that in this image there are things that are on top of each other, that are in front and behind each other. Well, this is how layers in Photoshop works. You have things that are on top and things that are in the back. You have top layers and you have background layers, and you have things in between. And Photoshop just takes those objects and kind of looks at it from the front and makes a snapshot of it, and that's how you put your image together. So it's important to note that layers that are on top, by default, obscure the layers behind them. They cover them up. Of course, you can do things like apply filters and change the opacity or the transparency of those layers. But if a layer is in front of another one, most of the time you're not going to be able to see the things that are in the background layer, behind it. So Photoshop takes those layers that are all lined up and makes an image out of it. So that's quickly what layers are. So now that we understand them, why work with them? Well, you can do a lot more things. You have more control. You can, instead of manipulating in a piece of a composition by selecting it every time, you can break apart your composition to all these different elements so that you can change those elements individually. Which really helps speed up your process. You can also be more organized, which kind of sounds funny, but when you're doing much more complex photo simulations, it really helps that you can rename your layers, and you can even group them into folders, just like you would on your operating system. And they let you do more. They unlock all these features of Photoshop that you're not going to otherwise be able to do. So you can do things with filters and you can do things with effects that you're not going to be able to do unless you work with layers. So let's go to Photoshop and let's talk about the layers panel. So I'm going to open an example image here. It's just an image I took with my digital camera. And I want to talk about this panel right here on the right. So if you don't see a panel called Layers, go to Window, Layers, and make sure that it's selected. And there's a couple of different features on this thing. So on the Layers panel, you'll see that on the top right, there's a drop-down menu which has a lot of different selections. There's a bottom series of icons that allow you to do different things. There's an eye icon here on the left, and then there's the different layers that you're going to be working with. So when I bring in an image from a digital camera, by default, that layer is called the background layer, and it's locked. And the background layer operates a little differently than most layers. Because it's locked, you can't do things like drag it to the trash can icon and delete it, which is how you delete layers. You also can't move it around. You'll see that it's not letting me do anything to it because it's locked. There it says it's locked. And you also can't move it in front of other layers once you add a new layer. So I'll show you that really quickly. I'm just going to create a new layer, and there's several different ways you can do that. You can go to this drop-down menu and hit Select New Layer. You can also go to this it looks like a little sticky note icon, and that creates a new layer. And you can also do a keyboard shortcut, which is Command-Shift-N. And that's going to bring up a dialog box. All those options, the same thing. New layer, you can enter your name, which is, let's just call it example new layer. You can have a color. Well, color is just a way of visually organizing your layers. It doesn't mean anything about the visual composition of your Photoshop file. It's just a way of helping you organize your items. In the same way that in Mac OS X, for example, you can have a bunch of different folders and you can add colors to them to help smooth your workflow. It also allows you to select your blending mode, which is something we're going to talk about in a future video, and your opacity, things that you can always change from the layers panel. So I'm just going to create that new layer and hit OK, and it comes up blank, right? So what I just did here is turned off the background layer, turn off the visibility of it by selecting that little visibility icon, which is that eye. So the great thing about Photoshop is that you can have layers, work on them, do different effects on them, and if you don't want them in your composition, you don't have to delete them, you just turn them on and off. So that's just changing the visibility of it. Let's continue our little tour of the layers panel. You'll see that the trash can lets you delete, the new layer icon lets you create a new layer, and then this folder lets you create different groups. So if I select that, it's going to just bring up a folder that if I say made a few different new layers, I can group them in different things so that I can turn them on and off at the same time. I can apply different layer effects to them, etc. So groups are really handy for helping your organization. I'm just going to delete the whole thing again, create a new layer. And let's continue on a tour. We're going to see there's that half white, half black. That's in creating a new adjustment layer, which we'll get into in a future video. You can add a new layer mask. You can add layer styles. Again, these are all things that we're going to get into in a future video. So let's just do a quick example of how you might choose to use a layer. So let's take this image, and I want to give it a nice little frame, kind of a make it look a little more three-dimensional. So I'm going to open another image. This is just something where it's very basic. It's a photo that it looks like a photo with a white border, but you can see there's nothing in the photo right now. Again, I took this image. It's from a screenshot. Came in as the background layer. I'm gonna select, double click it, and now it becomes in a fully a layer that I can manipulate. I'm just gonna go to my other image, and I'm gonna go take the whole thing, select all, which is Command A, cut it out, and go to my other image and paste it there. And you can see now that what I pasted in is much, much bigger than the original photo frame. So I'm going to have to shrink it down just like that. I'm taking the borders of the image, holding Shift and changing it to shrink it in. And that's good enough. I mean, it doesn't have to be perfect. I'm just putting it in as an example. And so now you can see that I have two different layers of this image. So I have my top layer. Let's call that. That dialog box was layer style, which we'll get into in a future video. But you can also just double click on the name and to rename it. So let's name it Buildings and Sky. And I'm just going to turn off the visibility of that layer real quick. And here's my background layer. And I'm going to name that photo frame. So really it's just a white border around the photo. Now what I want is that frame to be on top of the image, and I want that photo to be where the gray is. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to take my frame layer and drag it in front of the building layer. So now it's on top. It's solid, so you can't see through it. But what I'm going to do is take my magic wand and select that gray image that's right there in the middle of the photo frame. So there, I take my magic wand. It selected the gray. You can also just do. I could have done a simple selection using, like say, my rectangle here. Done something like that. But let's just go with the magic wand. I've selected it, and I'm just going to delete that whole thing. Delete. And now you'll see that because the photo is in front of the building and sky, it has the frame. It frames the image. So that's just a quick way of using layers. You can do lots of different things with it. But by deleting that center gray part, now I can have my image, my layer behind it, come through. So what otherwise was solid, once you delete it, your layer, the parts that still are solid, that are not deleted, still cover up the things behind it. So that's just a quick example of how you might use layers in Photoshop.